the only reporter with law enforcement as they raided homes on Milwaukee's northwest side.
I have been following along with the FBI's undercover gang task force. This morning, we were there exclusively as they raided homes all connected.
At 3:47 a.m. Austin, Texas. 950 pounds of fentanyl tied to a single ring. 87 officials flagged for arrest. Some elected, some sworn, some appointed. $640 million in laundering flow traced through shell companies and fake public contracts. 19 trafficking corridors mapped from border cities to inland distribution hubs. And one name sitting at the center of it like a crown. Governor Darius Wexler. Not a street dealer. Not a cartel soldier. A man who shook hands on camera and spoke about safety while the poison moved under his signature. This wasn't an outside threat. This was betrayal wearing a flag pin. And if you think this ends with a raid on a mansion, stay with it. Because the first door they kicked in wasn't the one that mattered most. The one that mattered was buried in encrypted drives, hidden ledgers, and a file that read like a blueprint for a drug empire built inside government. At 4:12 a.m., the streets around the Governor's Hill residence were dead quiet. The city lights in Austin glowed soft and distant, as if the night was trying to pretend nothing was happening. A low fog hung near the limestone walls, drifting across private security cameras and trimmed hedges. Then, the convoy arrived. Unmarked SUVs. Matte black vans. 2 armored vehicles parked in shadow where they wouldn't silhouette against the street lamps. FBI tactical teams moved first. Black helmets, black plates, faces set like stone. DEA agents followed with evidence kits and chemical detection gear. ICE teams staged just behind them, because intelligence said the ring wasn't just narcotics. It was human trafficking. It was migrant smuggling. It was a corridor built on fear. Daesh liaisons monitored comms. Aerial support held back, rotors silent, waiting for the moment the operation turned loud. And it wasn't just the governor's residence. This was coordinated, statewide. At the same moment teams stacked at the Austin gate, other strike units moved on targets across Texas. A cartel-run social club in San Antonio that never closed. A warehouse near Dallas labeled as a medical supply distributor. A ranch outside Laredo with floodlights that stayed on all night, even when nobody lived there. A private casino behind a members-only lounge in Houston. A massage front in El Paso that ran on appointments booked under fake names. A trucking yard outside Corpus Christi that filed manifests no one ever audited. Every location on the list was tied to the same thing. A political drug syndicate that operated like a corporation and protected itself like a government. At the governor's gate, a team leader raised 2 fingers. The signal. Bolt cutters snapped through the exterior lock like it was cheap metal. A ram hit the secondary barrier. The iron gave way. Agents moved up the drive in a tight formation, boots quiet on stone, rifles angled down, fingers disciplined. No shouting, just the sound of equipment and breath. The residence door looked expensive. Thick wood. Brass hardware. A seal of the state worked into the design like a promise carved into a lie. The breacher didn't hesitate. The charge popped. The door folded inward. A flashbang went off inside, white light bursting across marble floors. Then the entry. Federal warrant. Hands. The first rooms were what you'd expect. Framed photographs with donors, campaign plaques, polished furniture staged for public image. But the second hallway told the truth. Security doors inside the home. Interior cameras angled into unusual corners. A keypad on a door that should have led to storage. DEA agents moved toward it. The keypad was wiped clean. No prints. The breacher set the tool. Steel screamed. The door opened, and behind it, Texas stopped being Texas and became something else. A cold room, industrial-grade shelving, sealed cases stacked in clean rows, a digital scale on a stainless table, a pill press with residue still dusted across the plates. One agent reached out and lifted a case lid. Inside were blue tablets, stamped to look like legitimate medication. But they weren't medicine. They were fentanyl pills. A quick field test confirmed it. And the room tightened, like the building itself had just become heavier. The count began. 950 pounds of fentanyl packed in bricks and pill bundles, sealed tight to suppress smell. 42 kilograms of cocaine wrapped and marked in coated ink. 118 kilograms of methamphetamine bagged like bulk product. $9.4 million in cash bundled in plastic, labeled by week. 63 firearms, including suppressed pistols and modified rifles. 4 encrypted laptops on a charging station. 2 satellite phones. And a steel box bolted into the floor. Not locked. Welded. That's when an FBI agent looked at the wall and noticed something that didn't match the architecture. A seam. A slight shift in stone patterning. He pressed. The panel gave. A hidden compartment opened, revealing a narrow cavity filled with hard drives, a paper ledger, and a folder stamped with an official-looking seal that didn't belong there. Not a stash note. Not a dealer's notebook. Documents. The kind you use to move contracts, budgets, approvals. The kind you use to move a state. Upstairs, in a master bedroom that smelled like cologne and expensive wood polish, a man in a robe stood frozen, blinking hard under flashlight beams. Governor Darius Wexler. He tried to speak like authority could stop physics. This is unlawful. I demand. He didn't finish. An agent's voice was calm, flat, practiced. Governor Wexler, you are being detained under federal authority. Turn around. Hands behind your back, plastic cuffs clicked. And in that small sound, the image cracked. Because the real threat wasn't the fentanyl in the cold room. It was the fact that the cold room was inside a governor's residence. If you're still listening, understand the scale of that. This wasn't a cartel hiding from the state. This was a cartel operating as the state. Across Texas, the other raids ignited in sequence. In San Antonio, SWAT teams hit the social club just before last call. Inside, patrons ran toward back exits with duffel bags of cash. DEA agents poured through smoke and neon, flashlights cutting through colored lights. A hidden door behind the bar led to a room lined with shelves holding heroin bundles and cocaine bricks. In Dallas, the medical supply warehouse turned into a drug fortress the moment agents breached. A lookout fired 2 shots through a loading dock door. Agents returned controlled bursts. A suspect tried to climb into a truck cab and start the engine. He was dragged out before the tires rolled. Inside, pallets labeled sterile gloves concealed boxes of fentanyl powder and press molds. In Laredo, ICE agents and DS teams struck a ranch property where heat signatures didn't match the footprint. Behind a barn, they found a concealed holding house. Thin mattresses, plastic water jugs, cameras mounted high, and a gate lock on the inside. Migrant smuggling wasn't a rumor here. It was an assembly line. In Houston, the private casino front collapsed in minutes. No neon signs. No crowds. Just a quiet back room where chips became cash and cash became a wire transfer. When agents broke into the office safe, they found ledgers listing amounts, dates, and initials. The initials kept repeating. Dwah. Back in Austin, the twist was already unfolding. Because the steel box in the cold room wasn't money, it was something worse. When they cut it open, they found a set of encrypted drives labeled with a simple name, Project Red Harvest. And inside the folder with the fake seal, draft warrants, procurement authorizations, and internal memos written in the language of public safety. But the content was private. Target lists, schedule manipulation, orders that looked like policy but function like protection. The kind of paperwork that doesn't belong near narcotics unless the narcotics are protected by power. At 6:28 a.m., the operation moved into its next phase. Quiet, clinical, inevitable. Inside a federal cyber forensics lab outside Austin, the temperature stayed cold to protect equipment, But the atmosphere was hotter than any firefight. Hard drives were cloned. Phones were imaged. Laptops were isolated in Faraday bags and then opened under controlled conditions. A cyber analyst named Nina Calder stared at one of the governor's encrypted laptops. This wasn't standard encryption. This was layered like someone expected to be raided. The FBI cyber team worked in silence for hours. Only the soft click of keys and the occasional muttered status update. At 9:03 a.m., the first partition cracked. What appeared on screen wasn't a confession. It was a diagram. A network map with nodes and corridors stretching from border cities to inland hubs. At the top, a title in clean letters. Operation Lone Mirror. Under it, the structure of a syndicate that didn't look like a street gang. It looked like a government program. Shell companies with patriotic names. Ghost corporations registered in Delaware, Nevada, and Puerto Rico. Offshore accounts routed through layers of trusts. A sham charity called Texas Families Renewal Fund that processed donations in suspiciously regular increments. A construction firm that received state contracts and then wired consulting fees abroad. A logistics company with refrigerated fleets that crossed Texas like veins. Money flowed like it belonged there. Drug cash became casino revenue. Casino revenue became business income. Business income became campaign support. Campaign support became political protection. And political protection became safe corridors. The analysts traced disguised transfers across continents. Payments routed through Caribbean accounts, then into European holding companies, then back into U.S. property trusts. Paperwork designed to make every transaction look like it was part of normal commerce. Then the screen showed something that made the room go still. A digital signature key. An encrypted authorization token attached to corridor approvals, contract sign-offs, and public safety reallocation orders. The key name wasn't subtle. Look Exler _EXE_ a youth. That key appeared on route approvals near El Paso, on inspection delays along the I-35 corridor, on patrol scheduling changes that conveniently cleared the road at night, on contract payments that funded private security around stash warehouses. This wasn't a governor being bribed. This was a governor directing. This is not corruption. It is command-level collusion. And when Nina Calder opened a hidden file within Operation Lone Mirror, the plot turned darker. It was a corridor plan labeled the Sunset Route. It mapped human trafficking and migrant smuggling corridors as cover traffic. Convoys of migrants created chaos and distraction. Meanwhile, refrigerated trucks carried fentanyl, cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine behind them. The ring used human suffering as camouflage. That's when the case stopped being about narcotics alone. It became about engineered treason. A separate folder contained a list of compromised officials, mayors, procurement officers, sheriff staff, border-adjacent contractors, a judge's aide, and several high-ranking law enforcement administrators. And the total number matched the briefing. 87 officials. Not rumors, not allegations in a hallway. A payroll system with dates, amounts, and coded confirmations. At the bottom, one line appeared like a promise of what was next. Phase 2 begins at dawn. If you're still here, you already feel it. The mansion raid was the opening note. The next phase was going to be a statewide strike at 3:52 a.m. The next morning, inside a command center staged near San Antonio, a massive digital map of Texas glowed in the dark. Red markers pulsed across the state like a heartbeat. El Paso, Laredo, McAllen, Brownsville, San Antonio, Austin, Houston, Dallas, Corpus Christi, Odessa, Midland, Abilene. Each marker represented a node connected to Operation Lone Mirror. Stash houses, warehouse fronts, private club casinos, pill press sites, trucking depots, transit houses, and cash conversion rooms. A mission commander, special agent in charge Rowan Silt, stood in front of the map with a voice that didn't shake. Over 1,100 federal agents are moving on this grid, he said. 46 SWAT teams, 12 armored units, Black Hawk air support for rapid containment, Border aviation assets are in the air. Local assistance is compartmentalized. No one outside this room sees the full picture. He paused. Then the sentence that ends quiet investigations. Execute. At 4:06 a.m., the secured message hit every unit. Action. All units, move. Texas lit up. In El Paso, FBI and DEA teams hit a warehouse disguised as an auto parts distributor. Inside was a drug super lab, chemical drums, ventilation rigs, press molds, and tables dusted with residue. They seized fentanyl powder, pill press equipment, and pre-stamped tablet dyes designed to mimic prescription medication. In Laredo, ICE and DEA intercepted a migrant smuggling convoy before it reached a known transfer house. Vehicles were boxed in, agents shouted commands, drivers tried to reverse out. A Black Hawk pushed low overhead, rotors thundering, shaking dust off the road. Engines off. Hands out. Some complied. One van tried to bolt. A spike strip ended the chase in seconds. Inside the vans were exhausted people, used like cargo. Behind them, in a separate refrigerated trailer, agents found narcotics hidden behind pallets of produce. In Houston, SWAT teams struck the private casino back rooms and a finance office above it. Inside were counting machines, counterfeit invoices, and a server rack humming behind a false wall. Cash wasn't stacked casually here. It was recorded, categorized, and converted like corporate revenue. In Dallas, a cartel-run bar with security posted outside turned into a gunfight when suspects tried to flee through the kitchen exit. Muzzle flashes lit stainless steel surfaces. Agents advanced with discipline, short bursts, controlled breathing, no panic. Within minutes, the building was silent except for the radio chatter and the sound of cuffs tightening. In Corpus Christi, the trucking yard was hit before sunrise. Refrigerated trailers sat lined up like they were ready for normal shipments. But inside the trailer walls, hidden compartments carried fentanyl pills and cocaine bricks. In Austin, the final sweep hit the political spine. Offices, consultants, and a private security contractor that had been billing the state. Not with guns raised. With paperwork. Warrants, subpoenas, seizure orders. And by mid-morning, the operation's impact was undeniable. Tons of narcotics seized, weapons removed, server farms taken intact, key cartel members captured, and multiple officials, some in suits, some in uniforms, placed in cuffs without cameras, without speeches, without escape. The underworld took more damage in 6 hours than it had in the last 6 years. But the hardest truth didn't come from the raids. It came from the internal records. Because the cartel hadn't just bribed people. It had built a parallel enforcement system. At 1:26 p.m., investigators began combing through seized servers, transaction logs, patrol records, and internal emails. The patterns were too clean to be accidental. Border relaxations timed perfectly for convoys. Patrol grids falsified and backdated. Way stations mysteriously closed for maintenance when specific trucks passed. Raid schedules leaked before teams left their staging areas. Evidence rooms misfiled narcotics samples that would have strengthened prosecutions. They weren't just corrupt. They were coordinated. A list of payments showed how the 87 officials were managed. Monthly consulting retainers, paid through sham nonprofits, routed through shell companies, delivered as crypto, cashed out through casino accounts, and handed out in envelopes that looked like campaign donations. Among the compromised names were Judge Halston Reeve, tied through an aide who received speaking fees from a charity that never held events. Mayor Celia Marrow of a border-adjacent city, connected through a construction contract that funded cartel-run safe houses. Chief Nolan Varr of a mid-sized department paid for manipulating patrol schedules. A senior sergeant, Rex Doman, who had access to internal tasking rosters and quietly redirected units away from key corridors. And then there were the honest ones. The ones who had been fighting the entire time without knowing the deck was stacked. A veteran state trooper, Elliot Crane, sat in an interview room and stared at a printed email thread. His own briefing notes forwarded to an unknown address hours before a failed raid. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He just whispered, "That's why the house was empty." That's what betrayal does. It doesn't just harm the public. It breaks the people sworn to protect it. Federal agents began making the second wave of arrests. Quiet, surgical. Senior sergeants, deputy chiefs, procurement planners, policy advisors. Men and women who weren't carrying bricks of fentanyl. They were carrying authority. And authority was the cartel's greatest weapon. Because what investigators were seeing wasn't just infiltration. It was a second secret police force, a parallel enforcement system controlled by the syndicate and protected by the governor. A system where the badge didn't point toward justice, it pointed toward the cartel. By nightfall, an internal recovery plan was drafted. Not a press stunt, a rebuild. Audit systems. Rework chain of command. Remove compromised leadership. Reassign vetted units. Install independent oversight. Because when the shield is stained, it doesn't get polished with speeches. It gets rebuilt from the ground up. And then the case widened. Because Texas wasn't the end of the map. It was the center. When analysts zoomed out, the corridors didn't stop at state lines. They ran into neighboring states through trucking contractors. They ran through port cities using altered shipping manifests. They used fake green energy grants and agricultural routes as cover. They disguised narcotics as cold chain freight so the cargo could move without inspection delays. The network could move multiple tons of narcotics per week without triggering alerts because alerts had been engineered to ignore specific patterns. Shipping manifests were altered by insiders. Weigh stations were shut down at perfect times. Inspection teams were diverted with training exercises. Migrant smuggling and human trafficking were used as moving fog, chaos that distracted from the real freight. Then came the final catastrophic file. Hidden deep inside Operation Lone Mirror was a document labeled Permanent Governance Model. It wasn't a threat letter. It was a plan. A long-term strategy to turn Texas into the permanent headquarters of the syndicate by capturing procurement, privatizing security, rewriting oversight, and ensuring that law enforcement only chased enemies, never partners. One line sat near the bottom, cold and exact. Texas must become the shield, not the battlefield. That's the chilling realization. The system wasn't merely infiltrated. It was redesigned for the cartel future. And now, the moral conclusion. Because stories like this aren't just about raids and seizures. They're about what happens when power stops being accountable. Power does not always need open violence. Sometimes, it only needs silence. Sometimes, it only needs ambition. Sometimes it only needs one signature to clear a corridor, one contract to fund a front, one official willing to look away while fentanyl moves through the bloodstream of a state. And the cost isn't theoretical. It's the overdose call at 2 a.m. It's the funeral no one live streams. It's the neighborhoods hollowed out by cocaine and meth. It's families broken by heroin. It's fentanyl pills small enough to fit in a pocket and strong enough to end a life in minutes. This is a warning about political infiltration and organized crime. Because when institutions become tools, the public becomes collateral. If you're still watching, you're the kind of person who doesn't look away. Tap like so more people see this story. Comment expose if you want this kind of corruption dragged into the light. And subscribe, because the next chapter in stories like this is never announced ahead of time.